News Talk, 95.1 FM, 790 AM. This is KFYO Mornings. Dave King, Matt Martin, and with us in the studio is Lubbock County Sheriff Kelly Rowe. Good morning, Doctor.
Not Dr. Runland here. But
Sheriff Rowe.
Doctor. Hey, good morning, guys. How are you? Good to be here.
Hey, we're good.
Thanks for coming in, by the way.
Gosh, the big news, I guess, what was it, Friday? Our county commissioners.
This one came out, but they actually voted for it on last Monday, right?
Well, I don't. I think the vote for Monday was, when they. My understanding is when they set what the tax rate is, they're going to do. There's a difference in they set it as the effective. There's no necessity that doesn't necessitate by law to hold public hearings to discuss it versus setting it at the the current actual. So I think that's what was actually voted on.
And so they had no public hearings on that.
They won't have to, but typically those wouldn't happen until September when they're in the budget adoption process.
My question on this deal is, Sheriff Rowe, here we are. Lubbock County is growing. It's going to be necessary for you, I would imagine, to add more deputies to cover that. I know Lubbock Chief Stevens is getting 10 new officers to cover because Lubbock is growing and we need them. And I'm sure the same thing applies for you out in the county. You need more cars, more deputies. You need a bigger budget to cover it because we have more people. And yet we have the county commissioners cutting over $2 million from your budget.
Well, that's just it, And again, when you look at the manner, in which this came up, which as I talked about last week, last Monday a week ago, we receive a late afternoon memo from the budget committee that just basically says here's 4 points to is how the budget's going to be closed out this year. The first item on that was there'd be no raises of any type for any employees. Number two on that was the actual wording was a majority of any new requested positions were not going to be authorized. Then 3 and 4, 3 was they were going to examine what our budget was that was adopted for FY18, the current year we're in, and our budget request, and whichever had the lower request in it, line item by line item, was the number that would be set in place. And then what goes to your question, Dave, the big part of it was the zeroing out of our capital outlay, which is where our big equipment typically goes. And so when we looked at that immediately, the first thing you notice is, well, that's all vehicles, first and foremost. Those have now been zeroed out. And even more important to that, which has still been somewhat of a head scratcher, and I haven't gotten any kind of a solid response on yet, is we've been in a project now for a couple of years working on upgrading our radio capabilities out in the county. And it's been a two-part thing. First part was to ensure that our radio system we use, which is piggybacked off the city system, has what's referred to in that world as 95% handheld coverage. So the portable radios, it's actually on the officer's hip. 95% they're going to have coverage anywhere in the county they go, including any topography issues such as the canyon and those types of things. Mm-hmm. The bigger part to that was and this has been overdue for decades, is we needed to significantly upgrade the radio capabilities for our county fire departments, our volunteer fire departments out there. Because basically they have coverage out to the loop, given where the current one tower is and the one repeater is. So when they can contact and talk to our communication center, who's their primary dispatch, they can only do it from the mobile units in their vehicles. Their handheld coverage is basically useless other than for them to talk back and forth to each other. Not to mention they don't have enough what they refer to as ground channels to be able to manage a large-scale fire, especially if multiple departments are responding. And that project, like I said, this year alone, we've expended or will expend by the end of September this fiscal year about $775,000. The work's been going. In fact, I had some of our staff was about to head down to where the radio manufacturer is to do some testing on the system the first part of September. And then, as the plan was we would be budgeted for the remainder of that project for October so they could continue that out and hopefully have that system up and going by the first of next year.
Okay, so let me ask you this real quick. Bill McKay on, everythinglubbock.com stated that right now everything's in pencil, nothing's in ink, which sounds like to me he's saying that things could potentially change. Have you heard anything like that from the commissioners?
Well, it's contrary to what he told me the following day when I went over to find somebody to go. Really, is this really the game plan here? According to what this memo says. And again, you said you'd read the memo and saw. I mean, if there was anything in there that said there's still room to negotiate, to do anything, and you have to go back to. And one of the things that really struck me about this year was when you look at previous years, when we get to this point of the budget process, year after year, there's always comes a point in time that you have to look at. Here's what they come to as a final dollar. And a lot of times there's things that have to happen to make that, that final dollar work. So, usually I would get visited by the commissioners. They would explain this to me and say, what can we do? Can you either get some equipment this year out of any leftover funds or unexpended funds that you may have in this year's budget, so that can be removed from the subsequent year or the upcoming year's budget? Can you? In years past, I have tried to assist in easing some budget difficulties by using forfeited narcotics funds to offset some shortfalls there. We need some reductions, and they'll come to us budget by budget with a prorated percentage or an amount to say, okay, for your jail budget, we need $250,000 removed from that, and from your law enforcement budget, we need $85,000 or something, whatever the number is, removed out of that. Take it from where you've got the discretion to adjust the line items as necessary. So we normally would have a process like this. I've never seen the arbitrary. Here's a memo, it's done, it's finished, and it's not until somebody like me starts asking questions, are we serious? And do you understand and asking the question, do you understand the ramifications of this? Because again, anything you push off, when we skip a year, because guys, keep in mind, law enforcement, sheriff's office, police department, fire department, we're equipment-driven professions. So, we work very, very hard each year to ensure that we don't create bubbles in the system with regard to cycling equipment out. Things have, everything has a life cycle. A car is only going to go so many miles. Body armor only has so many years that it's good for before it's out of warranty and has to be replaced. Weapon systems, radios, as we've already talked about, those types of things. And so we build life cycling plans in so that each year we're life cycling so much equipment out, and replacing it with new, so that, again, I'm not showing up one year because we haven't been paying attention to it with a big balloon effect going, oops, we weren't paying attention here, and now I need, $3 million to replace all our radios or, all of our body armor, or, and all of this type of thing. So, I was asking those questions because when you use the vehicles just as one example.
How many vehicles does the Sheriff's Department have?
Active fleet, is nearing about 150.
Wow.
By the time you
and
count
so every year you've got to retire so many of those.
Exactly. And there's a process we go through too, because obviously first and foremost, our patrol units, the ones that are running and going all the time, that have the highest likelihood of having to move quickly from point A to point B, that get into pursuits and do those types of things, they're going to be the first ones to see vehicle replacement. But we take those vehicles when they hit a certain threshold, and those vehicles are then cycled down to other divisions within the sheriff's office that don't have those kind of mission requirements that they're having to run and go. So again, when you see the ripple effect of just skipping a year, you go from our request this year, our capital request for vehicles, which is a standard request, about 16 vehicles. In order to correct that next year, it's going to take a 45-vehicle replacement.
Okay, let's do a quick break, and we'll come back and talk more with Sheriff Rowe, Lubbock County Sheriff Kelly Rowe, after this. News Talk 95.1 FM, 790 AM. This is KFYO Mornings. Dave King and Matt Martin at your service and on your radio. 67 degrees as you're getting up in the hub city this morning, and 7:49 AM. Talking with Lubbock County Sheriff Kelly Rowe.
So, now I'm just listening to what Jason Corley has said. He's been on the radio a couple of times. He said essentially that there's $3 million extra coming from sales tax and additional properties, as well as you've got this $3 million they're also taking away from the different departments. That's $6 million. Do you know where that $6 million is going?
I really don't. Of course, our conversations have been very limited, and, typically speaking, when it gets into that level of conversation, that's usually budget committee commissioners and the auditor's office that are, that know those, those or track those particular things. Now, again, when we started our process, just when we started our process for this year, which we take about 3 months to do in the early spring, one of the directives I gave the command staff when they started that process was I said, given the election outcomes, some other things, I said, keep things as flat as possible. Let's not look to do any increases. In fact, we only included one exceptional item, which is about a 6-year-old item that just we can't seem to get addressed each year. But other than that, the general operating budget was keep flat. So if you take out, the radio project that's in there, we tried to be as flat as possible. We did have some increases that there's inflation on things. When the vendors come in and tell us, hey, for budget prep, understand your body armor is going to cost more money next year. When we have certain individual software providers that your licensing costs are going to go up. We had those. We also had several line items throughout both of our primary budgets, law enforcement and jail, that went down some because we had the ability to reduce them. But like I said, for the most part, we tried to turn in as flat a budget as possible, so that no matter what happened this summer with regard to, the revenue coming in, we were trying to stay at least as close to what we were last year as we could. And like I said, right up until the point you start, you enter capital outlay into that and zero it out, well, then it becomes a thing. Now, as far as what's out there, the only thing that's been looming out there is the possibility of a changeover with regard to our primary county software provider. But those details have been minimal. There's been a process going on now for I think a little less than a year. Looking demoing various different vendors. Stuff, but in terms of what is the plan with that, we haven't been given any information on what the direction or thought is with regard to that.
Well, at what point will they release a line by line of where all this money's going?
According to my understanding, they won't allow that to be public record until it's officially submitted and certified through the county clerk's office, which generally happens. There's a date line, and forgive me as we're sitting here. I think there's a date requirement that has to happen by statute prior to the commissioner's court, where the budget would be potentially formally adopted.
Okay.
So
how do you see this affecting the citizens of Lubbock?
Well, we've actually been working through that. Once we received that, one of the first things I did the following morning was call in key personnel. And I said, let's look at this two ways. First off, let's look at the fiscal impacts of what this is going to do to us. More importantly, look at the operational impacts of what's going to happen. Since then, we've now started a process of evaluating, okay, how do we, what are we going to actually do here? Because we're not going to sacrifice in areas, that we just can't do it. So what I think you're going to end up seeing, and they're still working on that process now, but, to compensate for higher costs for body armor as an example, I think one of those areas that's going to get hit is training.
All right, we got to go. We'll take a quick break and be right back after this. And we are back here at 7:57 a.m. Dave King, Matt Martin here with Lubbock County Sheriff Kelly Rowe. And we have some people who have texted us this morning, and they want to know, Sheriff Rowe, would you lose any deputies or any jailer positions because of this $2 million budget cut?
No, there's no. One thing not directly impacted on this is any personnel. We're not in a situation of any layoffs or anything. Again, this is, the big concern comes is are we going to be able to function next year? Absolutely. Under this, if everything stays as it is, which it appears it's going to, we'll function and we'll meet our missions as we need to do it. What'll end up happening and what impacts the taxpayers out there and our citizens is that, like I said, in order to write these things, for this, skipping of what we're doing this year, it's going to cost 2 to 3 times more to write just back to where we need to be, let alone, to your point a little bit earlier, with the growth and everything, if we were wanting to forecast and look at expansion anywhere, that's going to get pushed further down the road because there's only going to be so many dollars available.
Well,
and so while you're correcting what we didn't take care of this year, next year, then we have to look, now we're suddenly start talking about what's going to happen in 2020, 2021, and 2.
Yeah.
So,
well, we have another texter this morning that, and it leads right into what I was saying. I mean, we know from having you on the show before that we have a big drug problem that we used to never have in Lubbock.
Exactly.
And I pointed out it seems like we have a shooting every day. Well, we're not going to have time to have an answer in this break because we've got a hard break coming up here in just a few minutes. This is we'll hold the sheriff over here until after 8 o'clock, and we'll come back because we still have a lot of things we want to cover. It is 7:59, coming up on 8 o'clock, and we're gonna take this 8 o'clock break and be right back with more of Sheriff Kelly Rowe. And we do want to remind you that our text lines are open. If you have a question for the sheriff, please text us at 806-680-2790. We'll return with more of the sheriff in a moment. And good morning, 8:07, and we are back here with Dave King and Matt Martin and Lubbock County Sheriff Kelly Rowe. And we were getting into a question before the clock ran out on us from some of the people who have texted us this morning. And one of the things that it just keeps coming back to my mind is how it seems like we just have this total increase in shootings in Lubbock and violence in Lubbock. And it just seems to me like that this is a very odd time that they would be cutting our budget for the sheriff's department. Again, when the city is adding budget to the LPD because of the growth,
right?
10 new officers. I'm sure that you probably need some more deputies. But the question is, with the increased crime in Lubbock, do you need more personnel?
Well, yes, and not that it was requested this year. We had a very, very minimal request for personnel this year. But we've worked, and I think we've talked about this before. We work in terms of 5-year increments, and so we're evaluating each year because, again, I fully understand the limitations of what revenue comes in. I understand that if I come in as I did a few years ago when this narcotics problem in particular and the gangs really started to coalesce and we saw that compounded problem, come in and knew that request alone would probably trigger with the way the county works and functions would have to require a tax increase, in order to accomplish it. Typically speaking, like I said, we'd like to keep things as even as we can year by year so that we're not providing that big bubble or mushroom effect to happen, that impacts, and makes the challenges and decision-making for the Commissioner's Court that much more difficult. I realize there's other aspects of the county that are still, having to operate, that they may need, increases in their budgets for various things. Just noticed a text here a second ago from our juvenile center. That's an area that needs a lot of help, both from a facility standpoint to an operational standpoint. And you've got a conversation started again about the 17, 18-year-old thing, changing that age of, criminal responsibility. So again, you've got to be very cautious when all of these things are on the horizon to be taking steps backwards that you're going to have to catch back up before you can even look to advance the other. To your point, Dave, what we know of that's been reported is roughly 30 shootings since the 1st of July. Now, again, all gang-related type things.
This sounds like South Chicago.
I understand completely. And, we're applying between all available agencies, us, the police department, Texas Department of Public Safety, and some of our federal partners are out there leading the charge on trying to bring that stuff under control. But again, everything has a cause and effect to it, and those impacts will eventually get out and reach that.
Well, I'm telling you, the citizens of Lubbock, I don't think are going to stand for this because as we were talking off mic, I've been in Lubbock 50 years, and I've always felt safe in Lubbock. We just have not had the crime problem that you hear in a lot of other cities, and now it seems like we are, and I'll tell you, it's very disconcerting to me. We have a texter this morning who says, is there a potential of proceeds from asset forfeitures to help with the line items such as maintaining the fleet? Will the public be kept informed about how asset forfeiture proceeds are being used for budget shortfalls and how that affects the sheriff's department? I heard you comment about
absolutely, and again, but the problem.
What are we talking about?
Well,
size-wise,
just right now today, and I just got my monthly report on that. Right now today, fluid available funds we have is about $311,000. Forfeited that we can actually use. And
a judge has control of that?
No. It's whether it's state or federal, it comes to me to be responsible for the auditing, the use of the expenditures, so on and so forth.
So if the DPS has that, it comes to you, and then DPS asks you for it, and you
no. Every agency is independent when it comes to their asset forfeiture. So again, police department has its own asset.
You
their
guys have to
assets
account for it,
and we account for ours.
And it has to be spent in certain ways, does it?
Right. There is criteria on what's allowable and not allowable, and in the past we have utilized those forfeited funds to help do assist in helping budget offsets or shortfalls, as whatever term you want to use there. But as a result of that, we've depleted. Where when I first took office, we were well over $1 million, down to where we are today. So yes, we can do some things with it, but we're just limited. And unfortunately, the way that works these days, it's harder and harder to see those big cash seizures happen. The criminal element's gotten smarter too, and we talk about that. They've figured out alternative ways so that they're not having to move a lot of times big loads of cash like they historically did. Usually, the old rule was you caught the dope going north and you caught the cash going back south. Well, now they're using banking, they're using Western Union, they do things like that to shift the money directly back to Mexico. And so it's a lot harder for us, short of getting into the white collar stuff and being able to dedicate people just to working with the banks and those types of things to try to capture those funds before they're collected down south. So again, it's not something that we count on, that we can sit there and count on to use year by year by year as an offset. It's usually going to be an exceptional purchase here and there and those types of things nowadays. But again, even looking at what we have pending that hasn't been adjudicated or awarded to us through the forfeiture process. Again, it's not a significant amount of money. So in terms of fleet, no, this won't do anything. I mean, fleet is just too expensive to try to handle in that manner with what we've got. Now, like I said, in previous years, have we purchased vehicles through fleet? Yes, we have. We still purchase a certain number, like some of our administration vehicles and some of that through there, but again, that's a dwindling asset, and it's not going to be there.
A quick answer: are we seeing an increase of shootings / crime from people that are not from Lubbock?
Well, no. A lot of this is still embedded gangs. These are folks that, like I said, historically have kind of done their business. We would normally interact with them through standard stuff, but just because of the proliferation of narcotics, has gotten the gang activity really amped up. Yeah. And again, like I said, what you're seeing, typically speaking, is local individuals that are members of these gangs.
I'll tell you, as far as I'm concerned, and I will bet you that most of the Lubbock citizens would agree with me that this is not the time to be cutting the sheriff's office budget.
So, Sheriff, how long have you been the sheriff of Lubbock County?
Since 2009.
Okay. During that time, has the budget process ever worked in this manner? Has
No.
the Commissioner's Court ever treated you this way?
No, not like first off, never seen anything this drastic. But secondly, like I said, usually when you get to this phase of the the budget process where it's time to close it out and whatever term you want to use, being a little tongue in cheek, we've got to share some pain, we've got to do some things to get to a certain number. We've had those conversations. We've been given the opportunity to make the adjustments, try to find some solutions to avoid, taking any significant hits in certain areas. This year, like I said, it was all quiet right up until last Monday when that memo hits, late afternoon, and we're told this is the way it's going to be. So
I'd love to hear your thoughts on why do you think this happened.
Well, again, when I went back, or after receiving that and having an opportunity to go in the following day and locate, looking to see, if anybody was in the office, and located a particular commissioner and asked a lot of these questions. What's driving this? A lot of this doesn't make any sense. You're gonna, those types of things. The answers became pretty clear pretty fast. I mean, although the initial thing I received was, well, the taxpayers said they wanted lower taxes, which I thought was interesting because I don't remember hearing a lot of that during this last campaign season. I remember hearing don't raise them. There was certainly a lot of conversation about raises and those types of things. But when it gets down to it, there's definitely definitely a situation where elections have consequences, and that was made clear to me. they're upset over the outcomes of some of this, and this became quite arbitrary quite fast.
Yeah.
So with that, as far as looking back, has there ever been budget cuts from the aspect of us having a year like this? I mean, really, you've had everything going up. All the housing prices or values went up. All of the taxes, as far as they're getting more money. Even keeping the tax flat, they're getting more money. Have you ever seen them cut the budgets when you've got a year like that?
No, but again, like I said, myself, my office, my commands, my staff isn't in the middle of all of those numbers. Those are things the commissioner's court, the auditor's office, and those individuals tend to track and whatnot. I mean, we can hear the stories of, for lack of a better term, the stories of woe. It's going to be a tough year. It's lean. We're going to have to be lean this year. Whatever buzz phrase you want to kind of apply to it, but not to this extent. Where from everything I hear, much like you guys, that there should have been more available. And again, as I said, in one of the earlier segments, we looked to stay flat. We didn't look to any dramatic increases that weren't unanticipated types of things. So again, to get hit all of a sudden and go, well, suddenly it's got to be lean. We've got to tap reserves. We've got to do all these things. I'm like you. Yeah. I don't know what's driving.
Well, Sheriff, we got to go. I'll tell you, you've been very interesting this morning, and I think we could talk another hour or two easily if we wanted to. We appreciate you coming out and kind of setting the record straight.
Well, it's my pleasure to get out here, and again, like I said, this is one of those things we're going to battle through the semantics and all of that.
I would say this isn't over yet.
No, I don't believe so.
Okay, it's again, thanks for coming. And it is 8:18 a.m. here on KFYO Mornings. Quick break, and we'll be right back.